Just headbang. There's got to be some metal epidemiologists, do you think?
I'm sure like in every other group, there are people who do and people who don't.
You
don't know Dr. Emily Gurley. You don't know.
I don't. Sara Canaday's here to talk leadership. Emily Gurley's here to talk about contact tracing and diseases and creatures. Something. I don't know.
Creatures being us. Creatures who need to wear masks and do
viruses. Yeah. I'm glad it's not viri. We have a show today. We have things to do. We have people to see.
There's so many things to talk about. I can't wait. Michelle's here for it already.
Hi, Michelle. Welcome to the Backpack Show.
The Backpack Show, where we bring you insights about success from unusual places.
That's what I was going to say.
Today is a very interesting combo.
Yeah. So we start with leadership. We go into epidemics, and we get to talk about what would 2,000 people storming a Capitol building without masks look like on a contact tracing app.
Hi, everyone. Tim Kitzrow from NBA Jam and NFL Blitz, welcoming you to The Backpack Show. Your hosts, Chris Brogan, Kerry Gorgone, Boom Shakalaka.
Backpack Show.
That feels like a Friday morning opener, but we use it every day. It's like, doesn't it?
I don't know.
Like he's always got weekend energy, Tim Kitzrow.
Yeah, Tim Kitzrow brings the juice. So I never get tired of it.
Coach Woodard. So I am on LinkedIn, like most people, I guess, are on LinkedIn at this point. But I have the whatever LinkedIn Premium, LinkedIn Pro, whatever they call it, the one you pay for, that tells you when people creep your profile. And, the other thing it does is suggest LinkedIn learning courses to you. And so it suggested to me one by Sara Canaday on going from manager to leader. That's actually not even her most recent one. She's got about 15 LinkedIn courses. She's written books about leadership, including You, According to Them, and Leadership Unchained. So we're going to talk with her about becoming a better leader.
There's so much to that too, and I'm excited to have this conversation just because. I just had a random conversation with a guy who works at the bank that holds my mortgage, and he was complaining about he just can't stand the remote work situation. And I said, what's funny is I sell training and education on this, and you know what people really don't seem to want to buy? That. So one of the things I'm going to ask Sara right off is, do leaders buy leadership training, or do leaders bosses who hate their leadership skills buy it? So that's my first.
I think people who want to be leaders themselves.
Well, yeah, nervous, managers. Yeah.
Nervous, like they just want to be better.
Well, look, you get made the boss. You don't know what to do. Let's go.
Right, so you don't know how this is because everybody loves you, but like you can tell if people don't like you. So I think managers, like everybody else, can probably tell if people don't like them and they want to be better leaders and get results.
Well, let's grab Sara and get it from Sara herself. Well, hi, my biological father, Steve Brogan's here, as is my mom, his wife.
Your only father and mother.
That's as far as I could tell. Hey, Sara, how are you?
Hi, I'm great.
So who buys that course? Do people buy it for themselves, or do people's bosses say, you're not that good, and give them the course?
I think predominantly people are actually doing it for themselves. It's the go-getters, the people who see a gap and they want to close it, whether it's, sharpening their skills or trying to figure out how to make a bigger impact. But yeah, I mean, there's probably the occasional little nudge or hint from the boss. You may want to look at this book, or I've often suggested that people leave the book on their desk, even for their bosses.
Oh, wow. And then run away quickly.
Yeah, hoping that they might come in and pick it up, and you can subtly suggest it. It goes both ways. Let me tell you, it's not just bosses to their team. It's teams to their bosses.
Well, especially the way that a lot of times internally people get promoted. They want to promote from within, but some people don't have any management or leadership experience. They're just really good at the job they had. And so I'm sure those people are scared to death, but also the people who promoted them should want to set them up for success.
Certainly. I mean, I think, the sad truth of it is not only do they not have experience, but even if they've been a leader for some time, many of them don't have a good example. So they don't have, a good role model. And that could start even at a very young age. I remember when I was in corporate and I had people reporting to me, and I had this one woman who was wicked smart. but she didn't have any of the emotional intelligence, right? She would kind of go rogue in meetings. She might be a loose cannon, but she didn't know any different. I mean, this is what she saw growing up. She didn't have any, view of what it looked like to be, both, sharp, confident, but also humble and gracious.
From Boston?
Actually,
we could say that.
Yeah. She was from South Texas. She was a tough girl, but ended up doing really well and just phenomenal, actually, to this day.
So, Sara, your book, You According to Them, that's basically according to the people who are subordinates of leaders. This is the ways that you're tripping us up. Basically, that's the way we're perceiving this book. Do I have it backwards or do I have it right?
No, you have it spot on.
Okay.
But I would just widen the audience, right? It's anybody, your colleagues, your clients.
Sure.
Right.
Sure. That makes sense.
Yeah. We're obsessed with the customer experience. We've been talking about that for years, but we need to be as obsessed with the experience we give others in our day-to-day work, because that's what really matters.
There's a greatest hits in this book. Like every chapter you go through, there's something pretty intense, because I don't know if you take a look at even just the table of contents, you'll see it. But I'm like, I know that person. I know that person. I am that person.
Yes.
Oh, I'm that guy too. And it's basically, frozen compass. Like I know this is the way. This is the only way. It's like the Mandalorian for a boss. These are tricky. So the way the book handles it is it talks through, maybe this is what they're thinking when they're thinking these are the things they're doing. Here's some ways you can approach it. It's very gentle and suggestive in a way to help guide people through. My guess is that's through the experience of telling people, you can't just go up and say you're a big stupid idiot. I guess, is that what you've learned?
Yeah. Two things. I think I chose certain nuanced blind spots, right? I mean, these aren't the classic, the guy's a blowhard, or these are more subtle. So I think the reason there's gentleness in there is that these are well-intentioned, well-meaning individuals. They really are. And they are simply, keeping themselves from getting to the next level or relating to others better because they don't see their own blind spot. So yeah, people do want to grow and learn, but they stop short of getting feedback because it feels very personal. They want to be accepted the way they are. And those two things run counter if you think about it, which is why you hear all the time people want feedback, but they stop short of getting it. So it's
just when they don't, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, and then they don't know how to ask for feedback. It's usually, hey, how do you think I did? Or how do you think I'm doing? Well, that's too big of a question. People don't know what to do with that. And half the time or more, they'll tell you what they think you want to hear. But
especially if they report to you.
Yeah. So, the book was meant to give people a way to see either themselves or others, and also a way to approach that person. And if it is you, how do you rectify that blind spot? How do you narrow the gap between, who you are and who you want to be in that particular nuanced blind spot?
How do you recognize within yourself that there's room to improve? Do people typically come to your book or your course after having had a bad experience with someone that reports to them, or a gentle nudge? Or is it what kinds of things should they be looking for if they're oblivious, let's say,
right,
to most of the signs? What would tell you need this book or this course?
Yeah. Well, I mean, when's the last time you sat? I mean, I can remember when I was in corporate sitting in some sort of a, communication training or something and looking around going, who needs to be here and they're not, right? I hate to admit it, but I think that happens a lot with books. It's the continuous go-getter, the achiever, the person who wants to know how to be better. They're the ones that are going to go out and grab the book, or it's been suggested. But I do think there's other ways that people can sort of tap in, to whether or not they need something like that. And that just means slowing down long enough to, as simple as watch people's reactions, look at their facial expressions, look at what kind of reaction you get when you're making comments in a meeting. If they're less than favorable, or you're getting, jokes that are subtle hints about, your approach or the way you do things, then those are all signals that maybe you need to relook at something you're doing. So I do think it's possible.
Things said in jest, they say, there's always a seed of truth in it, right?
There's absolutely.
We've had people say, put empathy in your backpack. And I think that's part of it too, paying attention to how people respond to you. Carol says, I met a lot of people like that in my corporate life, people who just don't see how they get in their own way.
Yeah, absolutely.
You, a little slight shift. You talk a lot about leading through the chaos. And one of the experiences I've had since about 2004 or 2005, I started wanting to preach the gospel of working remotely. And I was working in telecom at the time in technology, and Sun Microsystems, who doesn't even exist anymore, they were really pitching it because they had this really great technology that allowed you to pretty much set up your desk anywhere, which wasn't normal. Now we all have all the tools to kind of remote and into anything, as if the tool was ever the problem. But what happened was leaders always said, yeah, sure, yeah, remote. But last year, suddenly a whole lot of leaders were remote. There's a whole lot of, I can't do button chair management, so I'm going to make the worst leadership choices I can make. You must have had a lot of input and feedback on that, and you must have had a lot to say and deliver to it. Just some thoughts on what this last year has wrought in the sense of remote leadership?
Yeah, it did put an accelerant on things in terms of work from home. That is for sure. And it did make it really challenging. I mean, what I heard from leaders is, starting from its simplest, there was no sharp delineation anymore between lunches, dinners, and the end of the day. I mean, one meeting was leading into another, no time to catch up and either prepare for the next meeting or digest what just happened, because people were trying to pivot. They were trying to respond and, get a sense of how the pivot was working. So on leaders, I think it was a really tall order, not to mention the messaging that team members wanted them to get right. And a lot of them didn't know all the answers. They may not have messaged it in the best way, but I think, teams need to give leaders some leeway during this time. But I also saw that leaders found ways to make their position even more impactful. In fact, I just talked to a leader yesterday who said, I abandoned my once a month, 1 hour, one-on-one meetings. And I thought, oh, wow, that seems counter to what you should be doing. And she said, no, I replaced it with 15-minute check-ins every 2 times a week. She said, because I realize right now, that's what my team needs from me. And I mean, I think the other interesting thing is we're starting to look back at things that we abandoned in 2020 because we had to in order to pivot. But the real question, I think, and the real interesting thing is when we reconsider those things that we abandoned, I am here to tell you, I think half or more of those things we will not reintroduce into our day-to-day activity. So it begs the question, are we doing everything that we need to do? Is it earning its rightful place on what we do and what we put on our calendar? So yeah, I mean, the challenges this year for leaders has been enormous. The other thing that I have advised leaders to do is be willing to get a thinking partner. I have a sister who is in retail, works for a well-known company, and she's a district manager. And she got to the point where with all the COVID and what to do and who to send home and when, at what point, she'd come to the end of the day and say, oh my goodness, did I do that protocol right? Because it was whack-a-mole, literally in her stores. And I said to her, why don't you call your colleague, go through the process? You need a thinking partner.
Right.
And so you're just going to have to do things differently. But I think there is some real learning. I think a lot of leaders are rethinking their roles, quite frankly. I think they've had some time to think about whether or not they're tired of just igniting fires. Putting them out rather versus igniting them.
I think my least favorite type of leader during the pandemic or otherwise is not necessarily the one who micromanages, although I don't love that either. But there's one that I think of as like the seagull manager that flies in every once in a while and then starts, pooping all over everything and then like flies away again.
Yep.
So they're not absent, they're not present. They're like sometimes coming in and just criticizing everything and leaving. Which I find unhelpful. So if you had a leader like that, and you don't even get the chance to leave a book on their desk because it's the pandemic and you're remote, what can you do? Like, what's a good way to approach that?
Yeah, I am all for naming, addressing it head on, but it's just all the way you would address it, right? So if you come from a place of, I sense that I can add more value to the team, but what I feel is keeping me from doing that is I either, get a sense of what's going on and then we're sort of, we can do our own thing, but then things change after I've invested a period of time doing X. So is there any way that we can have more communication just so that as things adjust, and I know they will, I am informed sort of along the way? There's different ways of doing it. I think it's always about saying, I feel I can add value, more value, make a bigger impact, enhance this process. Here's what would help me do that. That is, I think, a good way to just approach that.
We have a couple of comments I wanted to get to. Coach Woodard says, as folks move up, they often don't realize that what worked for them before won't work in a leadership role, like moving from subject matter expert to leadership. So what are some ways to make that transition?
I have a course on that, transition from technical professional to manager. And I think, we see it all the time because we have these brilliant engineers and whoever, it doesn't matter what the industry is, but they do very well. They excel and they're used to delivering on their own. And then you put them in a position where it's about the collective delivery of the team. And we expect them to know how to do that. They can organize for themselves. They can plan for themselves. But now they're planning for a team. They're organizing for a team. They need to set the agenda, right? And, many of them get caught with trying to still be a subject matter expert. And you can't be a leader and a full-time subject matter expert. You have to let go of being the expert in the room. Be just as comfortable with questions as you are answers.
That's a hard one to train into people as well. So in my job in wireless telecom, I was the boss of this whole team, and that the exact thought dawned on me. I was like, wow, I am not going to go anywhere much if I still hold on to this subject matter expertise. So I'm going to make my team the experts to the point that I can't do it anymore. Like I full on can't put my hands on the keys. And I had an employee who I wanted to bring into some extra, roles and responsibilities. And he was thinking job security. If no one else if I can hoard my secret empire, then no one else can touch me and I'll never lose my job. And he'd had his work career was like a very scarcity mentality career. It wasn't his fault. He just was in a lot of really rough jobs where that's how it went. Yeah. But that just really resonated with me when you said that.
It's like Bob didn't know you were in telecom once upon a time, apparently. I don't know.
What? Oh, come on.
I don't know.
I was in landline telecom and wireless telecom. My other, as I'm sitting here just like absorbing it for me. And my first management role was I worked at 411 directory assistance for the phone company back when that was.
Can you imagine? Because he will answer anything.
I love to answer questions. But so what happened though is when they made me boss, my subject matter expertise on the floor translated well because my operators knew that I knew their job very well because I had them watch me do it. And they'd go, oh, he's pretty good. But you're right. Like the things that I needed to do as a leader had nothing to do with my typing set. What I did do though, is I said, these 6 people are super fast and these people aren't. I'm going to require you to kind of lift the burden off these nice people that can't do it as fast. So it was about the individualization of people. And I was just curious, where do you in one of your 15 to 30 courses or whatever you have, where do you talk about that sort of thing, about seeing the individual as opposed to the cog? Because that's a change I think a lot of leaders don't see very well, is seeing who's before them instead of the role.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think that's, years ago, I think the first to point to the individual was this idea of how do you reward and how do you acknowledge somebody? And it's not the same for everybody, because people want acknowledgement and recognition in very different ways. And it's the same thing for how you communicate with them. It's the same thing for how you help develop them. You got to understand what's under their hood, what makes them tick. And so you've got to be more individualized when you are communicating with them, helping them develop and grow for their next role, rewarding them, recognizing them. They're all different. Now, here's the interesting thing. There's the DISC and there's the Myers-Briggs and all those things where we're supposed to understand all these different types, if you will. And I get that, but I don't know about you, but in my day-to-day world, especially when I was in corporate, I didn't really have time to sit and think, oh, wait, I don't remember. Is she an ESTJ? Is she an I? Am I think that while it's nice, it's hard to do. And so what I tell leaders is there's nothing wrong with asking. I say the same thing to salespeople. If you aren't sure what your client wants in terms of a debrief or in terms of a presentation, ask them. I'm ready to help you with X, Y, and Z, or I know you want to hear about our latest product. In the interest of your time and what you most want to hear, tell me, would you like me to start with just the high level? Do you want it all? The other thing you could do is help them by saying, most people have interest in this. Would you like me to start there?
Right.
It's the same thing with a leader. You can ask your people. It's not difficult. You don't have to be, all knowing in terms of who they are and what they want. It'll start coming to you over time when you work with them. But initially, there's nothing wrong with asking.
You can also watch their reactions when you talk to them a certain way and see that some people glaze over when you get way into the details or something.
Right.
Just try to remember that.
If you step by step me, I'm looking out the window at step 2, and other people
constantly.
Other people, they're looking for the steps. So anyway, Sara Canaday, stick with us. We have you for another segment, but thank you so much for being part of this right now.
Oh, my pleasure.
Boop. I keep refusing to put the ads at the begining of the show like I'm supposed to.
You just don't want to.
I'm going to do them fast today, though. Okay. And we already, thanks for your money.
Okay.
Pub-site, pub-site.com. Authors like Sara can make her own really cool, awesome, super fast author website at Pub-site. It takes just a couple hours, super fast. $20 a month and for all inclusive everything. I mean, that's amazing. If you don't even want to make the site, they'll do it for you. $500. See Brogan.me/StreamYard. I've got to remake that graphic. Make your own StreamYard. Brogan.me/StreamYard. Here I am trying to put up different ducks. Those are not mallards, by the way.
Get your own infectious disease doctor and your own leadership expert.
Damn straight.
Everything else is built in.
And Johnsonville. We're sponsored by Johnsonville. It started as a joke. Now it's reality. We are sausage dealers. We are distributors of sausage.
I got sausage strips yesterday. So when we did Johnsonville Appreciation Day, you had gotten sausage strips. And I was like, oh, that's nice. They sent you them and they didn't send me any. That's cool. And then they watched it. Stephanie there watched it and sent me sausage strips.
That's very sweet.
I was so happy.
But did you get a griller? Because,
no.
All right. We have to switch.
I have to complain about that.
We have to switch from leadership, which to some people it feels like a disease, to talking about real diseases. So,
like actual diseases.
Emily Gurley, how did you find her?
There is a free course on Coursera on contact tracing, and like more than 1 million people have taken it. It's almost 1.2 million people, I want to say. And I was thinking about the role that contact tracing has played in countries that have been successful managing the pandemic and just how important it is. So I wanted to talk to Emily Gurley because that course was hers, and she knows what she's talking about.
Is there a doctor in the house?
There is now.
Hi, Dr. Gurley. How are you?
Hi, I'm doing all right.
Joe.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Thanks for making time. I know you're busy right now.
Full of a million things, I'm sure.
Yeah.
When it comes to that, where's the hot spot for you versus kind of how the public is experiencing something like COVID-19? Do you know what I mean? Like, it's not necessarily like at the early part, is it more, is it less as it goes on, or where's the hardest part of your work timing wise?
The hardest part of my work, timing, not quite sure I understand the question. Like,
where are you the busiest in the span of an epidemic? So, hey, there's this weird thing in February. Okay. Turns out someone had sex with a bat or something.
Oh my God.
Right. Well, I mean, this is the first pandemic I've lived through, so not much experience to compare to, but it was, for what I do, was certainly more intense early on, where everything was still an emergency. I think now we have systems up and running. We know what the game plans are and what's happening. So it functions in a more orderly fashion.
Go ahead.
So I'm sleeping now. Yeah, I'm getting sleep now.
So I was thinking about, like, most people's experience of epidemics comes from like movies. So like we're used to, I don't know, Morgan Freeman or Dustin Hoffman or something like that. Everybody, like, you're wearing like the, Ebola suit in your office in our minds. So what really happens, and like what's the crazy part, and then where does it get to feel a little bit more like science again?
Well, I've done all aspects of outbreak investigation. So I've spent most of my career studying emerging bat viruses. So done the spacesuit, sampling animals, trying to figure out where a new disease has come from. I've done all of that. So there's a certain amount of, particularly later, movies on outbreaks, some of the scenes are pretty realistic. But there's a lot that happens in a pandemic, that's beyond that, initial recognition of what's happening, right? I mean, we have to, not just investigate, but respond to this pandemic for many, many months. So there's a lot of meeting time. There's a lot of talking to media. There's a lot of trying to make yourself useful, identifying where gaps are, how those align with, well, personally with my own expertise and skill set. And jumping in, because don't in a pandemic, you don't need a hand engraved invitation, right? If there's something that needs doing, and you know how to do it, then you need to jump right in.
But now seeing how the vaccines are being distributed and how the states are handling it and how kind of slowly that's going, I'm surprised nobody thought, hey, all the healthcare workers actually are pretty busy right now. Let's try and figure something else out. How are you going to manage a pandemic while also managing vaccine rollout?
Well, I think you're right. Relying on folks who are overworked and already overburdened to roll it out is rough. But it's the existing system that we have, right? So with everyone stretched thin, and I think I see this play out a lot when there's an emergency. There are sometimes new opportunities, right? Because there's pressure to do things that you wouldn't do normally. But people who are stretched really thin often don't have the mental bandwidth to come up with new novel ideas and create new things. So I think the rollout for the vaccine has been difficult because of those bandwidth issues. Also because a lot of people don't want to take the vaccine. So, the idea with going through hospitals, I think, at least in part, was also that those are the folks who we want to vaccinate first. They're coming into contact with patients every day. The reality is that a lot of those people don't feel comfortable yet taking the vaccine. And so they're not. So then you have the vaccines already at those locations, but we need to find a way to use them, even if they're not going to be given to healthcare workers.
One of the jokes / not jokes is that when we watched all these zombie movies, and when we watched kind of the trajectory of infection in zombie movies, there were these presumptions that we'd all want to save ourselves. And your point about people not even sure that they want to take the vaccine is intense. It's crazy to me. You're also doing some work with contact tracing, which is how Kerry found you. And my dad said that he's running the Nevada contact tracing app on his phone to opt in for it. Thanks, Dad. And because I want to know who infects you is why I'm thinking about that. Do you want to talk a little bit about contact tracing and what people should know and think about that, and also kind of how people are getting involved with that?
Yeah, I'm happy to. So I've used contact tracing, it's a standard tool in public health. So contact tracing has been happening all over the United States, all over the world for other diseases. It happens all the time. I've used it for other outbreak investigations. It's a very useful tool, not just from the public health intervention side, where we try to change people's behavior to stop transmission, but also from more the research side. How do we know who's at higher risk for transmitting, for being infected, and what are the types of interactions that lead to infection? So it's important from the response as well as the learning or research side. So early in the pandemic, we knew that this was going to be a really useful tool, right? This is one of the, if lockdowns and stay-home orders are a blunt tool, this is a more precise tool where you can identify people who are either infected and infectious, or people who've been exposed and could become infectious any day, and ask them to limit their contact with other people.
Which they may or may not do, right?
I mean, we live in a free country, which I think is a good thing. But that means that we have to do a bit more. We have to have a bit more conversation about what we're after and why. I think even if you convince someone, though, that they should do this, right? That this is a good thing to do, it's a big ask. Don't go to your job for 2 weeks. Do you have the ability within your home to isolate yourself from other people? I think there are real logistical challenges that particularly for, some folks who have less ability to control what happens in their day-to-day lives. And we didn't address that from the beginning of the pandemic either. So it's tough. It's a really big ask, this whole contact tracing thing.
But first in contact tracing, that's to learn how to become a person who does the contact tracing, who calls people and finds out like where they've been and that sort of thing, where they've been circulating. What does that entail, and why would people take the course, or why should they?
So there are really, I think, two groups of folks who've taken the course. So the course has been used all over the United States. It's the subtitles are translated into multiple languages. It's being used all around the world. And I think really, two objectives. First, it is designed to give an overview of what contact tracing is. So there are 5 modules. One is the basics of SARS coronavirus 2. So folks understand how it transmits, what it is, what the disease is. The second is the basics of contact tracing and how that works. So that's from identifying people who are infected through to the investigation, asking them to isolate, getting a list of their contacts, and then notifying the contacts and asking them to quarantine. Then we have an important section on ethics, as well as effective communication, which is useful in everyday life. So
talking to strangers to ask them questions that might sound intrusive.
Well, I mean, it's about talking, but it's about listening. How to be a good listener. That's just as important. So a lot of people take it to know, to learn whether or not they want to be a contact tracer, if this is something they want to get into. A lot of people lost their jobs and were looking for opportunities, and contact tracing was one way to become engaged. Some people, though, I think have taken it just because there's such a hunger for credible information about the pandemic and about what contact tracing is. So contact tracers facilitate contact tracing, but it's the general public, people who get a call from contact tracers that actually have to participate and change their behavior. So I think the more we can all understand about transmission and how this happens, the better off we all are.
And that's changing all the time, right? Like I remember in the beginning, they were talking a lot about, it being on surfaces and that sort of thing. And now that's not, the emphasis isn't there. It's on transfer through respiratory droplets, like in the air.
Right. I mean, I think those, I could become more pedantic about this because I follow it all very closely. I think we knew at the beginning sort of all the general ways transmission would happen. I think what we've seen play out over the pandemic is which ones are more important. And the reality is that some are more important in some contexts than others. So transmission and prevention all happens within a cultural context. What does the infrastructure look like? What are the settings look like? Or do you spend most of your time outdoors or in a closed building? So it's the nuances that we've really been able to unpack over the pandemic.
We had a comment from Nancy Ramsey in Scotland. Sorry, it's a pretty long one, but she says, my daughter is an ICU nurse. She got her first vaccine 3 weeks ago, was supposed to get her second now, but that's been canceled due to the fact that the NHS, the health service, wants to vaccinate more people with the first vaccine. I was reading a little bit about that. What's your take on that? The fact that now they're like, well, we have so little vaccine, let's vaccinate a bunch of people the first time, and the other people who are due for their second dose just have to wait till we have more.
Well, I think the dosing schedule is about a month apart. I don't know the specifics of what they're planning to do there, so I want to be careful about commenting too specifically. But I understand the rationale of vaccinating as many people as possible, and having a bit more flexibility on the timing of the second dose. If it's within a reasonable time frame, it's probably going to work just fine, somewhere within that month after the first dose. But I don't want to comment too specifically without knowing the specifics, because the devil really is in the details for those kinds of things.
I have kind of a weird question, and it's not related to sort of the story of how we feel in this very moment, but let's presume that this all works and a vaccine happens, blah, 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 we're done. It's like, hooray, mission accomplished. George Bush can come out again. What do you do? Like, do you just go back to looking at bat viruses, or like, what's Emily Gurley's life like when you're not fighting the planet?
Well, I think the pandemic will end, but this virus won't go away.
Right.
We have vaccines for a lot of diseases that are still around. So that's not going to happen. I still have my pre-pandemic job, which is running a number of research initiatives on bat-borne viruses, child mortality. I spent most of my career living and working in Bangladesh. And so most of my research is still there. I teach a number of courses here at Johns Hopkins, so I still have my day job, but perhaps the second after hours pandemic gig will ease up. That would be fine with me.
Tell those bats to stop having raves or whatever the hell they're doing, because we can't have this again. Like, enough with the bat diseases.
Turkey bats.
No, it's not. It's not the bats. It's absolutely the people
who eat the bats.
Well, I mean, we just as we encroach more on the natural world, we come into contact with them not just through eating them, through shared food, through shared environments. So it's us that are driving this interaction. The bats are not seeking us out, that's for sure.
So what do we need to do? Like, stop going into bat territory? Like, what?
I mean, I don't think we're going to be able to. Is that the way they say about it? Other wildlife is that this is it. We just have to kind of walk our way through it.
To a certain extent, yes. I mean, I think the risk of being melodramatic, it's not really my thing, but most species that have lived on our planet are now extinct. So what's to say the same, that we don't face the same odds. I think emerging infectious diseases do pose a threat to our society, certainly, and perhaps even our species. So we need to get better at identifying these spillover events when they happen, understanding when and where they're most likely to happen, and getting better at the response of shutting down transmission when we find them.
My kids play Plague Inc. And when COVID made it into like Greenland, they were like, oh, that's the game. Like, we're done.
When it hits Greenland, that's where it all goes wrong.
Yep. Bob's asking, do you feel the underlying causes of major outbreaks will be addressed on a national and global scale after this?
Okay, so will we learn from this and do better, I guess is another way to say that. I hope so. And just to make the point that it's not a new field, right? There are people who study this all the time. But the problem is sort of, at least in my own personal experience, the time scales and the intensity that we need to study these things is greater than the time scale of most research grants. And the reality is that finding outbreaks, finding these zoonotic spillovers is always bad news. So if we want researchers and academics to really dig in and try to understand these things, they need more resources, right? We need more awareness that these things take a long time, and we've got to really dig in and look harder. If we want governments to do this, we have to recognize that there are the incentive structures to find those that bad news work against us, work against our collective best interest.
Jeremy says that you're trying not to offend us. We're not offended. We don't care if we get something wrong. I'm not an epidemiologist. I don't pretend to be. So I'm happy to be corrected.
I'm all for hearing it.
No, I don't know what Jeremy's saying.
That's So anyway,
correct me as well.
I don't. I'm not sure what the comments about.
She's just polite, Jeremy, is what Dr. Emily is saying. She's just
also
polite.
I mean, I think the point he may or may not have been making, because I would never ever propose to know what's inside Jeremy's head at any given minute, is just that when she said, well, probably, who's to say the human race is going to stick around is the point. Maybe that was the comment. But what a perfect time to make a 90-degree transition to absolutely nothing to do with that and go bring Sara back into the mix. Hi, Sara.
Well, there's never been a time that we were in greater need of true leadership. So I think this all makes sense.
Well, which is the last thing Dr. Gurley said, which is that there's incentives, which clicked my little Freakonomics button, because, one of the finest books in the world to teach about incentives. There's no incentive for leadership to go dig up the monsters under the bed. And Sara, I'm curious to know what your thoughts were as you were listening to this, or were you just like me, like, well, we're all going to die?
Oh, God. There's a vaccine now. I don't know what, just stay home a little while longer. You'll be okay.
So thoughts just in general?
Anything, whatever makes you cheery right now.
I mean, we were talking pre-session this morning, and, I think about the amazing, feats that we have performed, businesses, there are logistics companies that, would blow our minds with how they handle routing and delivering. And I feel hopeful that, I know there's frustration right now about the movement or lack of movement of the vaccine. And we hear that there's, excess vaccines sitting there waiting, but I'm waiting for a lot of entrepreneurs to jump in and business people to work with the states and come up with just a brilliant business model to get it out. I mean, that's really my hope, because there's a lot of complaining, but we want to rely on the government, we want to rely on our states, on our cities, but I think it's going to take more than that, because they're fighting two things at the same time. But
there does seem to be a lesson here about leadership having to like eat the frog sometimes. Like sometimes things are bad and you have to be the one to say, I'm sorry, I know it sucks, but you're staying home for 4 weeks because if you don't, like we're going to be doing this for months. Like we saw some countries did that and then some didn't. And we see the different outcomes from it. So as a leader, how do you kind of do a gut check and make yourself do the hard thing when you know it's not going to be popular?
Well, I think first you be extremely transparent. I mean, nobody knows. Nobody knows if, if we shut down for 2 weeks, if that'll indeed solve the problem. And so in the interim, you've got people who they're trying to survive. And they just can't wrap their heads around shutting down. It doesn't, there's going to be other catastrophic events if we shut down business for too long. So I think it's a transparency thing. It's, here's the data, here's what it's showing us. I'm not necessarily a proponent of shutting down, but I want to see all the data and then, look to me as a smart individual, give me the data and then let me make my decision there and be transparent as a leader and say, this is what I recommend. This is what I think the solution is. Is it the right answer? Can I guarantee that this will solve the issue? No, but this is what the data and science is pointing to.
Well, turn it into something less fraught. Like if you have to change insurance plans and no one likes the new insurance plan, it's the same thing. You have to sometimes feel like this is what we're doing. So as a leader, I mean, you have to present that, I think just the way you're saying, which is like these are the reasons. And I may or may not like it as well, but it's what's happening.
Sure.
Like, gut check.
And I think too, right? As someone who, my job, I think, is to provide data for the conversations. But I think, data and evidence about transmission and what's happening, that if the studies are done right, the data are the data, the results are the results. But I think you can also have different perspectives about what the policy decision should be based on those results. And our ability to, wrangle work through those discussions together has been really difficult because we don't talk to each other about difficult things anyway.
Right.
Yeah, we really try not to.
Yeah. And so at the time where we need it most seems to be, in recent memory, a time when we're worst at doing it, which has been a big problem because in pandemics, unfortunately, you can't just digest the data for yourself and come to your own conclusion because what you do affects my risk and the risk of everybody else around you. And I think that, we failed. Science is tricky. I think we've done good with the science, but we failed the communication.
There's some real tricky parts to it for sure. One of the things that I heard Dr. Gurley say early in this as well was, I'm going to paraphrase and I will absolutely, these are my words, not yours. But basically, look, we're the scientists. Like we're doing this part. Like someone has to do a different way for the logistics, the distribution, all that. That's not our job. Our job is here's your drugs, go run it off. But there's a lot of things there's a lot of factors. I mean, Sarah just said, well, I'm not so sure this is what we should have done. And I thought, what? Like, this is absolutely what we should have done. So like right there, right in the four of us, there's going to be different opinions. And so I think that such an individualistic nation as the United States, it should not have been as surprising as it was that we ruined the planet as fast as we can.
Yeah. So, I mean, Chris, just to clarify, I'm referring to now.
Meaning it's time to open up now? Because I'd still go no. I'd still say
no. No. I just meant
the horse is definitely out of the barn though. Like the best time to have lockdown would have been like the beginning.
Now. Yeah. But I didn't disagree when we shut down initially. That's not what I'm talking about. Gotcha. I'm just talking about moving forward.
I mean, we eventually have to get back to work
So Bob Collins makes an interesting point when he's saying, how do you help instill consistent data and facts are being shared? And we've seen obviously like alternative facts and different versions of things, but we've also seen an unprecedented level of sharing in the scientific community, and the rate of information transfer for even between countries has been amazing. So how do you make sure everybody has the right data, the same data, the latest data, if the point of view has changed? I
mean, I think, I I'm the co-lead for an initiative called the Novel Coronavirus Research Compendium, NCRC. And what we've been doing is combing through all the scientific evidence that comes in on a weekly basis, thousands of papers, and picking out the ones that are the most relevant and important for our practice and changing what we do. Everything from interventions and how well they work, to the vaccines and how they're coming along, to what we know about transmission. So I think the problem that I see is not that we don't have enough good data. It's that I think, particularly from the perspective of the general public, there's an erosion of trust in the scientific process, in interpretations, even a mistrust of people who are experts, right? Just because you've been doing this your whole life doesn't mean that you know what you're talking about, sort of thing. And that's difficult, right? What do we do about that? I don't know.
Tricky for sure.
In a world where people diagnose themselves on WebMD, I don't know what I'm supposed to do. I mean, I think I've heard it referred to as an outbreak of armchair epidemiologists. That it can be.
That's got to be a thing. All right, we have two last things to do on this show before I can cut you loose into the wilds, back to much more interesting and greener pastures.
Creating new leaders.
First.
Oh, and here's our person of the day. Kaboom!
I feel like I just gave it to him yesterday, didn't I? Did I give Bob Collins this yesterday? Doing it again. Too bad.
You did.
Person of the day. You're going to beat out Coach Woodard at this rate.
Yeah, we need a jacket to give people who've been person of the day like five times.
Five times or more. So I did it. Bob, you're it. Get another apple. Get some sausages. All right.
Ooh, under the wire, Coach Woodard. You're never going to get that jacket this way.
Yeah, we're going to have to get you. Here's a question. What goes in your backpack? And that question means it's the next 5 years where everything's crazy, shifting sands, that sort of thing. You can only put one physical or metaphorical item into the backpack to change the world for the next 5 years. What would go in your backpack, Sara Canaday?
To change the world or to survive the changing world?
Whatever you want. Whatever you're going to do in the next 5 years, what are you going to put in there to make your next 5 years better for you?
I do live in Austin, Texas. And if it was to survive the world, I would put a big fat margarita in my backpack.
I like that. Are we talking frozen or the right way?
No, on the rocks, but no salt.
Oh, me
No
too.
salt.
You take it like I take it.
And I'm a double salt guy, so I'll take your salt.
So that works out. We can get margaritas together.
Dr. Emily Gurley, what goes in your backpack?
So for years around my house, personal and professional life, I have rule number one, so that would have to go in the backpack. And rule number one is don't freak out. So keep perspective, and even when things are going sideways, you gotta keep your head to think clearly. So rule number one:
don't freak out.
If you have to, can you limit it to like 5 seconds? Freak out.
Look, everyone freaks out. That's why you need a rule, right? But bring yourself back, because you're never gonna solve it when you're in that mode.
I think if I had the margarita, I'd freak out less. That's what I'm.
Rock, no salt. Me and Bob.
So my grandmother and my dad had a thing that they were on the quest for the perfect margarita. You have to understand, we were born and raised in Maine, so the Mexican restaurant scenario is a little different right out of the gate. So it was never going to be guaranteed. But I will tell you that what qualified for the best margarita, according to my grandmother, was this.